The title is the topic. Today I'm talking about false narratives.
Welcome to our multi-part video series exploring the roles and representations of feminist frequency. This project will examine the tropes, plot devices, and patterns most commonly associated with I'm Anita Sarkeesian from a systemic, big-picture perspective.
This is the first part of a series of response videos to Anita Sarkeesian's recent speech, Hate and Heroism. She makes some claims that I want to challenge. So with that said, let's begin.
My name is Anita Sarkeesian. I am a pop culture critic. My work deconstructs the representations of women in the media through a feminist lens.
A feminist lens where everything is sexist.
Because when you start learning about systems, everything is sexist, everything is racist, everything is homophobic, and you have to point it all out.
That was from a panel where you and a few other feminists spoke. You and the other women were doom and gloom for a great deal of that panel. It was so bad that toward the end, one of the women said this.
Of course, I think there has been real progress made. That's what I'm disappointed, but I accept your views that you all feel there's been exceptionally limited progress. I think it's a tragedy, actually, that all you...
No.
She was disappointed and thought it was a tragedy the way feminists like you frame things. But then you concede progress has been made.
So we have had progress, obviously, without a doubt, and just the makeup of the room and us being on this panel and having these conversations, and there's all kinds of things that we could list over the decades where progress has happened.
Yet you were concerned it was not enough.
My concern is that it's not enough.
This coming from someone who says everything is sexist.
And that if we just think that progress is this magical thing that happens on its own, then people aren't going to actively do the work to make that progress happen.
The issue with your idea of progress is it doesn't have much in the way of a dissenting voice. It's like you just want to tell everyone how it should be.
So I think that it's important that we're kind of cynical in some degree, to understand that we all play a role in making progress happen. It's not just something we can sit back and let other people deal with, or that it's just going to magically occur.
And that's what people like me are up against. Someone who's so determined to change things to her vision that people with legitimate criticism are set aside in favor of the narrative. Let's continue with the original speech.
I'm currently producing a series of long-form video essays on YouTube called Tropes vs. Women, in which I analyze the portrayals of women in video games.
Nothing wrong with that.
This particular project has made me the target of an intense online harassment campaign perpetrated by a loosely coordinated group of very angry gamers.
I will agree that she does receive a lot of unnecessary harassment. However, this project has also brought with it a lot of valid criticism, much of which you refuse to address in favor of showcasing harassment. Although, Anita does do more to defend her videos in this speech than she normally does, so I'll cover that when we get to it.
Over the last few years, I faced a daily barrage of sexist abuse. These attacks range from hacking and doxing attempts to rape and death threats made against me and my family. The near constant abuse has been and continues to be pretty awful.
I agree with what you said. It is awful and should stop.
I have extensively documented and discussed how and why these cyber mobs form in various talks and articles.
Before your Kickstarter update number 27, one of your backers commented about the lack of videos. How you spent a great deal of time talking about your harassment. Then you released a massive Kickstarter update that in essence was one big excuse that I covered in my 3-part series Hiding Laziness. There is no reason you could not have completed your videos over the last couple years even with the harassment you receive. You are choosing to spend a great deal of time talking about your harassment, and you choose to make these monstrosities instead of short videos with a quick explanation.
But today I want to dig a little deeper into the mentality that underpins the pervasive mistreatment of women both online and offline. Specifically, I'll be addressing 3 common ways women's professional and creative and intellectual work is dismissed. Those are the denial of women's earned accomplishments, the denial of women's life experience, and the denial of women's professional expertise.
And as such, I'll be dividing this video into 3 parts, with the first part focusing on earned accomplishments.
All 3 of these things work to reinforce gender discrimination and also make possible other more extreme forms of harassment. The dismissal of women's knowledge and contributions is a pervasive problem, but because it's more subtle than overt slurs and threats, many don't recognize it as a form of sexism.
There's plenty of legitimate criticism of your work that is not sexist in nature. What you're doing right now is lecturing your audience to more easily accept what you say as fact because of the possibility your work is dismissed in large part for sexist reasons. You are setting things up so when you actually do talk about your work later, you will seem more believable due to sympathy. Thus is the power of the harassment narrative.
Even the men who engage in the active denial of women's accomplishments, experiences, or expertise may not consciously understand what they're doing, which makes it especially insidious and harmful.
However, the women who actively engage in hiding behind harassment to avoid legitimate criticism are consciously aware of what they are doing. And because you willingly choose to do this, that makes it even more insidious because you are consciously aware of what you are doing.
So today I'd like to use my own experience to illustrate how this phenomenon operates in practice, but keep in mind that unfortunately none of this is unique to me.
The phenomenon of hiding behind harassment so you can push lies and manipulation isn't unique to you. In fact, your own experience has set a trend for other women who now do the same. Brianna Wu wrote a terrible article about Samus based on some obscure quote in an interview claiming Samus was trans. Deal with it. And someone tried to use that to edit a wiki page.
Studied extensively.
Randy Harper claimed she got swatted, but her self-provided proof of it happening said no tactical teams were dispatched. She provided proof that she did not get swatted after she claimed she did get swatted.
Studied extensively.
And we have you to thank for this, Anita. You helped foster this listen and believe culture where certain people can spew whatever crap they want and not be challenged by people who support the narrative. Your silence about all the nonsense that happens on your side is deafening. I guess when calling out BS challenges the narrative you try to create, you would rather remain neutral on a moving train.
So let's start with number 1, the denial of women's earned accomplishments. The professional accomplishments of women are consistently downplayed and dismissed in male-dominated fields, and we are often not given proper credit for our own work or ideas.
The legitimate criticism of women who hide behind harassment is consistently downplayed, and you are often given sympathy in favor of being challenged because, oh, that poor girl. Shame on those sexist men for daring to tell Anita her videos spew lies and manipulation.
So I'm going to start by telling you a simple truth.
Let's see how much truth there is.
I founded and run my own nonprofit organization called Feminist Frequency. I started Feminist Frequency as a video web series in 2009, which I filmed in my living room, and the goal was to make feminist theory more accessible to women and girls. Since those modest beginnings, I've expanded my endeavor and built it into an official 501c3 nonprofit organization.
So far, I don't see anything that is factually inaccurate. Seems legit.
In my role as executive director, I manage 2 full-time staff members and a whole host of consultants and contractors. Feminist Frequency still produces our educational media criticism, but we've also expanded our mission to include advocacy work around making the internet a safer, more welcoming place for people of all genders.
This may also be true, but when you expanded your advocacy work, you turned your back on the people who invested in you. Some of these people have let you know they want videos, and rather than produce content, you produce excuses.
In this pursuit, I regularly consult with major social media companies in developing solutions to curb harassment on their platforms. I'm quite proud of what I have built and what I've accomplished with this work so far.
You also have done many interviews and spent a great deal of time collecting and showcasing your harassment for the world to see. The difference is, in those cases, it's less about fighting harassment and more about bringing attention to yourself. You don't need to collect an entire week of harassment and showcase it for people. You've been doing this stuff for years, and all it does is delay the videos you are supposed to be producing.
These are all facts. Thank you.
Despite my criticisms, she did lay out facts, so I can't refute everything she says.
So this is all factual information. Sadly, but not surprisingly, thousands of my detractors spend countless hours concocting ever more elaborate conspiracies to try and deny and undermine that reality.
Anita is a man's puppet. Well, let's see what she has to say about this.
They do this in a myriad of ways, but here is one of the most popular. After the unexpected success of my 2012 Kickstarter campaign, I hired a co-writer and producer to help work on the new Tropes vs. Women in Video Games series.
Let's start off with the claim you hired him after your Kickstarter. Since you were talking about Jonathan McIntosh, he was credited as a research assistant in your top 10 best non-violent iPhone games back in December of 2011, about half a year before your Kickstarter. Over time, his titles in the video credits evolved to associate producer and graphics in the Hunger Games movie versus the book video, published in April of 2012, about a month before your Kickstarter. What was it you said again?
After the unexpected success of my 2012 Kickstarter campaign, I hired a co-writer and producer to help work on the new Tropes vs. Women in Video Games series.
He was actually a producer on your videos before your Kickstarter.
Studied extensively.
So now, I'm questioning how factual you are in this speech where you claim to be laying out facts. However, I don't know if you were paying him at that point in time, so maybe he was working on your videos for free.
Almost immediately, male gamers pounced on the fact that my newly employed producer, Jonathan McIntosh, happens to be male, and they began manufacturing a conspiracy theory in which I am not responsible for my own project.
They also notice a correlation with how similar the tweets you and him produce are, to the point where they are almost identical in many cases. You and McIntosh also have a history that dates back to when you first started Feminist Frequency. In fact, you said you sat down on a couch with him for countless hours learning how to critically analyze television shows. Like he was a mentor to you.
With the help of some amazing mentors.
A mentor who, to my knowledge, didn't help you start Feminist Frequency, but who now has a pretty important position in your organization.
Images like these are repeatedly created and passed around to perpetuate this false narrative that my producer is a puppet master pulling the strings behind the scenes. It's a Wizard of Oz style fiction in which I am portrayed as merely a pretty face who mindlessly repeats the work of an ominous male mastermind.
I have some things I want to say about this, but please continue before I do.
There's so many of these. These are attempts to discredit my work by insinuating that I am not who I say I am, that I do not have ownership of my intellectual work. The implication is that I am somehow not capable of operating my own organization.
I want to break that last section down.
These are attempts to discredit my work by insinuating that I am not who I say I am.
McIntosh being a puppet master does not change the fact you are Anita Sarkeesian, but it can influence how you act and what you say.
That I do not have ownership of my intellectual work.
McIntosh being a puppet master does not change who owns the work, but it can influence what you produce and the contents of it.
The implication is that I am somehow not capable of operating my own organization.
McIntosh being a puppet master does not change the fact it is your organization, but it does allow him to operate it the way he wants to through you. I'll come back to this puppet master narrative in a minute.
The assumption that women are not really responsible for our own professional accomplishments and therefore do not deserve our influence or success stems directly from sexist thinking.
The assumption McIntosh is the puppet master does not stem from sexist thinking, it stems from evidence that supports the claims.
This is the same mentality that calls into question women's competence or qualifications with suggestions of getting ahead based on looks or being hired to fill a diversity quota or sleeping their way to the top.
Those claims may be leveled against some women, but that is not the claim being leveled here. So you laid out several facts here about who you are and your organization, and you challenged the claim that Jonathan McIntosh is a puppet master. I'm going to lay out some facts and observations myself and try to present what I know so people watching can decide for themselves. I have 2 videos called Rundown on Jonathan McIntosh and The Mentor that talk more in depth about McIntosh if you want to know more. But for this video, I'll just highlight some things. First off, one of the first videos you made mentioning Jonathan McIntosh was Toy and Ads and Learning Gender, uploaded on November 16th, 2010.
I'll leave you with an amazing remix created by some female youth at Real Girls during a workshop with Jonathan McIntosh.
After that, you played a remix video from one of McIntosh's workshops, so you were at least promoting something he was involved in as far back as 2010. However, I never saw him credited in any of your videos until December 2011 as a research assistant. Now, it was around this time things started to change for you. Getting back to the present for one second, Anita Sarkeesian is someone I never heard of till last August, and shortly after that I took an interest in responding to her work. At that time, she had just released Women as Background Decoration Part 2, and a while later, 25 Invisible Benefits of Gaming While Male. While I will talk about things that transpired after that, this is a good time frame to work within for my points. So going back to 2011, when Macintosh first started appearing in your video credits, one thing that changed was you pulled your hair back in every video for around 3 years. You did have a few older videos where your hair was pulled back, but after he came on board, you never let it down in a video. Now let's talk about the clothes. After he came on board, they became plain and repetitive. You wore a sweatshirt for several videos, and even a plaid shirt here. Then eventually, plaid shirts became your signature wardrobe for Tropes vs. Women in video games, a look Macintosh used on several occasions. There's also the fact several tweets the FemFreak account makes are very similar to that of Jonathan McIntosh's Radical Bits account. So similar in fact that many of them are worded almost exactly the same. However, that has been talked about ad nauseum, and there are plenty of videos talking about that in depth. So moving on. Your video structure altered when Macintosh came on board. You talked more about studies and research, at least more so than you had previously. You started to sound more like Anita Sarkeesian from Tropes vs. Women in video games, and less like Anita Sarkeesian from before Macintosh started working with you.
Research has consistently found and is upheld as a gateway to math, science, and engineering fields. Gaming can improve problem-solving skills, teamwork, creative thought, and multitasking, promoting spatial memory, spatial design, and of course, imagination, and improve hand-eye coordination and enhance perceptual and cognitive abilities. Sadly, as a consequence of LEGO's decision to design and market their products almost exclusively to boys over the past few decades, have you ever noticed that, with a few notable exceptions, basically all female characters in video games fall into a small handful of cliches and stereotypes? It was probably my most ambitious project to date and took an enormous amount of time to put together, with well-researched, in-depth analysis. This project requires an enormous amount of research.
Another thing I noticed was you asking for donations at the end of your videos.
If you enjoy these videos, please help keep Feminist Frequency going by donating today. Just visit feministfrequency.com/donate.
Having watched most of your videos all the way through, I don't recall you asking for donations like that in a video till after Macintosh started appearing in the credits. However, a lot of this can be explained away as coincidences. So then, let's dig a little deeper into things that can't be explained away so easily. I mentioned when he first appeared in the credits it was as a research assistant. However, in the very next video, Top 5 Creepy Christmas Songs, Macintosh went from being a research assistant to writing assistant. Then you had a 2-part series about Legos. Where have I seen a multi-part series involving you and Jonathan McIntosh? I also believe this was the first multi-part series you did on your YouTube channel. Not to mention, this is Legos. Nothing wrong with that. But your channel used to focus on TV shows and movies, then it turned more toward toys and games. Something aimed at kids. The kind of thing Macintosh was working on before he became more heavily involved in Feminist Frequency.
I'll leave you with an amazing remix created by some female youth at Real Girls during a workshop with Jonathan McIntosh.
You also said your LEGO series was your most ambitious project to date.
I hope you enjoyed that video. It was probably my most ambitious project to date and took an enormous amount of time to put together.
The language and style of these videos resembled Tropes vs. Women in video games a lot. Almost like things were shifting away from what you were doing to something else. Almost like what someone else wanted. And now, Macintosh is credited as associate producer and graphics. In 3 videos, he went from research assistant to associate producer, all in the time span of about a month and a half. And he would retain those titles all the way up until Tropes vs. Women in video games, where he's a producer and co-writer. I'll get back to that topic in a second, but let's talk about when the harassment narrative started. Macintosh had said on his own Twitter account he makes tweets that are deliberately inflammatory, calculated attempts to antagonize people. This actually sounds like someone with troll-like behavior. After he released his video, Donald Duck Meets Glenn Beck, Macintosh referenced how Glenn Beck responded to his video. Now the thing is, this is what trolls thrive on. Goading reactions out of people. Trolls live for that. And oddly enough, Macintosh, who admits to posting deliberately inflammatory tweets, starts working for Feminist Frequency on Anita's videos. The Feminist Frequency account has made many inflammatory tweets since her Kickstarter, almost like the kind of stuff that is designed to draw a reaction out of people.
Studied extensively.
It has been suspected that Macintosh himself uses the FemFreak Twitter account. One thing I'll point out is Macintosh is all about technicalities. That is why he knows so much about copyright laws.
So I just want to give you all familiar with fair use and how it works. I just want to give you a quick overview of this because I think it's important to what I do especially.
He can technically do a lot of the stuff he does with remixing other people's work because it's legal. Now, if you look at the FemFreak Twitter account, even though it says it was created and hosted by Anita Sarkeesian, it is technically the Feminist Frequency Twitter account, and since Macintosh works for Anita, he could technically use it. One of the patterns that I had noticed with the FemFreak Twitter account, as I pointed out in Hiding Laziness Part 1, is how that account likes to stir up harassment before certain events. Almost like it was done deliberately to draw more attention to Anita and her projects. The thing is, it's believed by many of Anita's followers that only Anita uses that account. Since I can't prove for sure Macintosh uses it, let's set Twitter aside for a few minutes. I'll come back to it later, but I want to go back to Macintosh and how he's credited in the videos. For quite a while, Macintosh was credited as a writer and producer, that is until the 25 Hidden Benefits video. That was based on an article Macintosh wrote called Playing with Privilege, The Invisible Benefits of Gaming While Male. When I first saw the video, I thought Anita would be in it. To my surprise, Anita was nowhere to be found, except in the credits, where she was credited as a producer, and not even a writer, just a producer. In the time frame of a few years, Macintosh went from research assistant to being the writer, director, and star of his own video on Anita Sarkeesian's YouTube channel. Even though Macintosh has his own YouTube channel, it was hosted on Anita's, and she didn't even appear in the video. Now, another thing about this video was the 25 men. Up until this point, Anita Sarkeesian was the only person to star in her videos on her channel. Then this happened. Anita has talked about the Smurfette principle, yet in a way, she became a Smurfette on her own YouTube channel. Not to mention all the similarities I pointed out. The flannel shirt, the style of her videos. Anita also in a way resembles a Ms. Male character version of Jonathan Macintosh. After the 25 Hidden Benefits video, she had a Kickstarter update on January of this year. In it was a PDF file with a section talking about plans for the future. Begin a new video series examining the representations of men and masculinity in video games. If you read Jonathan Macintosh's Twitter feed long enough, you know this guy is infatuated with talking about toxic masculinity. And even though this is Feminist Frequency, which examines the portrayals of women in media, all of a sudden she's planning a video series talking about male representations. The update also mentioned complete a rebranding of Feminist Frequency, including a new logo design and website. For someone that claims she isn't a puppet, it sure does seem like someone is pulling a lot of strings when it comes to Anita Sarkeesian. And a lot of these changes favor Jonathan Macintosh, both in his position within the organization and the direction it's heading. Things started to drastically change when Jonathan Macintosh came on board, and there's a lot more to it than what Anita presents in her speeches. One thing Macintosh is known for is creating new narratives.
It's not quite what I want. It doesn't work for me. So I'm going to change that story a little bit. I'm going to add something to it. I'm going to take something away from it. I'm going to create a new narrative based on what I'm missing.
Now, before Macintosh got involved, this is what Anita looked like in her videos. She seems to have a different style. There seems like more personality here. What happened though? Why are things so much different than they used to be?
I'm going to add something to it. I'm going to take something away from it. I'm going to create a new narrative based on what I'm missing.
Around this time, shortly after her Kickstarter update, things started to change. The first thing I'll point out is Anita started to let her hair down in her Tropes videos. And while she does keep the signature plaid look for her primary Tropes videos, for the positive female characters, she ditched those in favor of something else. So while this is what she looked like after Macintosh showed up, it's almost like someone else came along and was like, I'm going to add something to it, take something away from it, to create a new narrative based on what I'm missing. Going back to the credits one last time, while Macintosh is still credited as writer and producer in the videos, in the positive female characters, Macintosh was not credited as a writer. However, whether Anita ever was a puppet may not be something that can be proven, and even if she was, who knows if she is now. Despite all the observations and evidence, I don't know if I can technically prove he pulls the strings. This ended up taking longer than I originally planned, so I think I'll end this video here, except for one last point. Going back to Twitter, recently Anita spoke at the XOXO festival. Around the time she took the stage, her account started retweeting stuff. I happened to be online at the time and noticed this. In this screenshot I took, Q&A time with Femme Freak. The time mark says 28 minutes, as in 28 minutes ago. Then, 8 minutes later, Femme Freak retweeted this. Femme Freak is killing it at XOXO Fest right now. The Q&A just started, and 8 minutes later, she's killing it right now. But how is Anita retweeting all this stuff while she's in the middle of a Q&A? I suppose she could have been on a phone or something, but I doubt Anita would have been on Twitter in the middle of something like this. So how did the Femme Freak account retweet stuff? Could it have been Macintosh or someone else? Who knows, but I do believe this suggests someone other than Anita does use the Femme Freak Twitter account. The thing is, many people believe it is only Anita who uses it. Many people think the harassment Anita receives is directed at her tweets and not someone posting as her. What I'm getting at is if anyone other than Anita is making those inflammatory tweets, then a lot of the harassment narrative is a farce, as it is not technically Anita being harassed so much as the person making the tweets, but the perception to a lot of Anita's followers is all the harassment is about what she said, not what someone else said. So if Anita claims she isn't a puppet, yet it is still possible someone else, possibly Macintosh, is using her Twitter account, why am I supposed to believe her claims? If you like this video, I have a playlist tackling Anita Sarkeesian and her work and encourage you to check it out. It also includes reviews of her Tropes vs. Women in Video Games series.
I get a lot of support from people who really like my videos, and they've even been used as educational tools in classrooms. Educational tools.
I leave my audience with one question.
Oh, did I win?